Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, April 26, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Dwight Professor of Law at Columbia Law School, Jamal Greene, author of How Rights Went Wrong, Why Our Obsession with Rights is Tearing America Apart. Meanwhile, India at a crisis point. U.S. administration reverses, will supply material support for the Indian government and allow for export of vaccine materials. EU to allow vaccinated U.S. tourists this summer. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been unpaused. Meanwhile, Washington, Warren Sanders and 14 other senators call for expanded Medicare. But it appears Joe Biden will instead seek permanent expansion of ACA subsidies. Supreme Court to hear a major Second Amendment case, which could essentially wipe out any anti-gun legislation. The key witness in the Derrick Chauvin defense, a former medical examiner, is now having his former police killing cases reviewed. Texas Republicans have aimed their voter suppression at cities. Biden administration extends free lunches for students until June 2022. Meanwhile, progressives lose in Louisiana congressional primary, and that seat to replace Cedric Richmond. And lastly, Joe Biden formally recognizes the Armenian genocide. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Joining me, as always, Emma Vigeland. Emma, how are you? Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. I have a bit of a case of the Mondays, but, you know, as soon as we start talking politics, it'll shake right off.
Yes,
well,
I have a little
technically, we all have the case of the Mondays.
Yes, it's going around. It's definitely going around.
Right, but I'm special, so...
You have the special case of the Mondays. Mine is mixed in with allergies. We got a lot to talk about today. Just want to point out that story about the Chauvin defense witness. If you have the Peacock app, you can watch it. If you don't have the Peacock app, it's quite easy to get the Peacock app. And in the Emma and I do a series of interviews for a second hour exclusively on Peacock. It's free, and it is. I interviewed two reporters, J.D. Duggan and Samantha Hendrickson, about this David Fowler a couple of weeks ago. They had dug into his record and found that there was all sorts of, well, there was a lawsuit going on by the family of, I believe the man's name was Anton Walker. And this guy Fowler, who was Maryland's chief medical examiner for about 17 years, I think it was, like 2002 to 2019. He had many cases where he found police officers not responsible for the deaths of people who died in their custody. And apparently all these cases are being reviewed. It was great reporting. You should check that out. J.D. Duggan, Samantha Hendrickson, two reporters who wrote for The Intercept, but they write, I think, for the University of Minnesota paper, and they did an amazing job. You should check that out. Meanwhile, we have a horrible situation in India. Over 350,000 new COVID infections as of yesterday. Many people believe that these numbers are actually less than the reality. Narendra Modi, right-wing, I think some would say fascistic leader of India,
Certainly a fascist, I would say,
has botched this dramatically. They were doing well, and then they basically relaxed too early. And there's virtually no vaccination happening. And I mean, it's a massive country, obviously, over 1 billion in terms of population. And it is a very desperate situation in India. And meanwhile, just the other day, we were talking to Ann Newman about vaccinations. I did an interview the other day about specifically Bill Gates's role specifically in the IP of vaccinations, but also broadly speaking, his role in public health in the world. And this is this is a perfect example of a problem that comes from having billionaires walking amongst us, is that their desire to engage based upon their own self-estimation there is no bar to entry for them because they have so much money. So if I walk around and I think to myself, you know what? I know how to manage the Celtics, better than the general manager of the Celtics, and I have billions of dollars. I just go buy it and the Celtics, and I have my way with it. Now that's all well and good for a basketball team. But the problem is that some of these people also think, you know what? I have good ideas about health policy, even though I have no history, no experience in health policy. So I'm going to dump a couple of $1 billion into that field. And no one is going to criticize me because so many of them are upstream from my revenue. Or I should say downstream from my revenue.
Well, he has a God complex to put it succinctly.
I'm perfectly fine with God complexes. The problem is that when someone has so much money, they can act on these things. He destroyed U.S. education for nearly 2 decades. And at the end of that run, his own commission study said, yeah, your experiment was wrong. And folks can look up the Rand Corporation's assessment of the Gates's education initiative. And we still have high stakes testing because of it. We still have attacks on and a desire to privatize our education. Very problematic. And it is a well-known story now that Oxford University was developing their vaccine and were going to disseminate this wildly. They were going to open source this vaccine. They had done something similar, I guess, Oxford University during World War II. I can't remember exactly what it was that they were fighting at the time. And Bill Gates stepped in, convinced them, you need to sell this to a private company and not open source this. The IP, the intellectual property of the development of this vaccine, what's involved with it, needs to be behind a paywall. And as such, we do not have wide production of these vaccines. Here's Bill Gates being asked on Sky News in Britain this question. There's no follow-up because, of course, you don't question this guy, despite the fact that his only bona fides at this point for public health is that he had a lot of money.
Did very little to prepare in advance.
And in terms of that, there's been some speculation that the changing intellectual property rules and allowing these vaccines, as you say, the recipe for these vaccines to be shared would be helpful. And do you think that would be helpful?
No.
Why not?
Well, there's only so many vaccine factories in the world, and people are very serious about the safety of vaccines. And so moving something that had never been done, moving a vaccine from, say, a J&J factory into a factory in India, that it's novel. It's only because of our grants and our expertise that can happen at all. The thing that's holding things back in this case is not intellectual property. There's not like some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines. You've got to do the trials on these things, and every manufacturing process has to be looked at in a very careful way. There's all sorts of issues around intellectual property having to do with medicines, but not in terms of how quickly we've been able to ramp up the volume here. I remember how shocked people were when we said we were going to do second sources in these developing country factories. That was a novel thing. And we got all the rights from the vaccine companies. They didn't hold it back. They were participating. I do a regular phone call with the pharmaceutical CEOs to make sure that work is going at full speed.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of things here that are just ludicrous. First off, the idea that he cited the Johnson & Johnson factory. That factory is essentially completely useless now. It is in the United States. It is in Baltimore. It has been under FDA purview, and it has basically shut down the Johnson & Johnson production.
They poisoned up to over 15 million doses.
At the very least.
Yes,
at the very least.
Weird example to choose, as you say.
And so the idea that there's something unique about vaccine companies in the United States is absurd. It's absurd. You have, in addition, the CEO of that vaccine maker sold $10 million in stock before his company, at least reportedly, ruined those vaccines. So that factory is basically shut down. This is something that we could have been anticipated. The idea that you cannot get a factory up and running to make vaccines in India, let's say, he used that example, with the year in advance notice that we had is absurd.
And India, as an example, is, to use that also is a terrible example because they are the world's, I think, #1 vaccine manufacturer in terms of the facilities that they have set up there.
It's absurd. Of course, there's the ability to do this. This story from Nature. The key bottleneck in the mRNA vaccine manufacture is a worldwide shortage of essential components, especially nucleotides, enzymes, and lipids. This is because relatively few companies make these products and not in sufficient numbers for global supply. Moreover, these companies are proving slow to license their manufacturing so that others could do that. That's the intellectual property. For example, every RNA strand requires a cap that prevents the human body from rejecting it as foreign material. It's the most expensive component, and the intellectual property rights for a popular cap design are held by one company, TriLink Biotechnologies, based in San Diego, California. This is, it's absurd. And the idea that Bill Gates, self-appointed now, czar of the world's health policy, we are supposed to be comforted by the fact that he is talking to the CEOs of these private companies whose job #1 is profits. Period. End of story. That is their job #1. And I would say, to the extent that that's even debatable, job #1 would be their own personal enrichment and then profits. Usually those go hand in hand, although we've seen examples during the plenty in the past that hasn't. All right, we got to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment with Jamal Greene, Dwight Professor of Law from Columbia Law School, author of How Rights Went Wrong, Why Our Obsession with Rights is Tearing America Apart. Folks, a couple of sponsors on today's program. As you know, I am sartorially challenged. Shopping is very difficult for me. I don't like going into stores to do it. Obviously, during COVID, I'm not a big fan of that. But even then, even before then, I think I was scarred as a kid because I would go into this place in Worcester and I was forced into wearing husky clothes. But nevertheless, they literally had husky on the label. Now I found an easier way to shop, a better way. Stitch Fix. It does all the hard work for you. Stitch Fix offers clothing hand-selected by expert stylists for your unique size, for your style, for your budget, whatever it is. All of these pieces are chosen based upon what you like. And what you're allowed to do, they send it to you. You try it on at home before you buy. You keep what you love, and you send back what you don't like. Stitch Fix has free shipping. They have easy returns. They have super easy exchanges. They include a prepaid envelope in your Stitch, your Fix, they call it. There's no subscription required. There's a $20 fee for the stylist, but that you get to apply to any of the pieces of clothing you keep. They have Stitch Fix has styles and clothing for women, for men, for kids, for everybody. They ship all over the U.S. and available in the U.K. as well. You folks have heard, hopefully, about my chukkas, my modern leather. I don't know, the shoe, sort of like a desert boot. I'm going to start kicking those out as we all start to, the summer when you've been vaxxed, you go out. I'm looking forward to maybe having like a dinner at a restaurant, or at least an outdoor dinner at a restaurant. And I've been wearing my Nashville 5-pocket straight fit pants. Those things have changed, have basically switched me to a 5-pocket pant now. Like it's put me on the 5-pocket pant level. And my daughter has stolen my flannel shirt. It was easy. It was fun. And now I spend a lot of time on Stitch Fix just liking or disliking clothes so that it gets, they figure out what I like better. You can get started today at stitchfix.com/majority. You get 25% off when you keep everything in your Fix. That's stitchfix.com/majority for 25% off when you keep everything in your Fix. Stitchfix.com/majority. Also, today's program sponsored by Third Love. Third Love uses the measurements of millions of women to design bras with all-day comfort and support. Each bra made with signature memory foam cups, no slip straps, and scratch-free band. Now, of course, I associate Third Love with my daughter sending me texts all the time. Can I get some more Third Love bras? That's basically what she says. And somehow, I don't know what she does with these things, but I'm like, how many bras do you need? But she loves them. And it's basically because apparently I'm not a bra wearer myself, but apparently very difficult to buy bras online because it's hard to get them to fit right. Well, they have a fitting room quiz. It focuses on size, on shape, and current fit issues, and your personal style. And they Third Love delivers bras and underwear that are perfect for you. It's better than a traditional bra fitting experience because you can do it from the comfort of your home. From loungewear to wireless styles to their #1 rated 24/7 classic t-shirt bra, Third Love is changing the game when it comes to comfort and style. You can check out Lounge by Third Love to find the ultimate loungewear in premium cotton fabrics available in drapey knits, 100% cotton, French terry, and woven styles. Here is our official, one of our official Third Love bra triers. The idea that I had 60 days to try out the bras drew me in, but in the end, I don't think I've ever had a better experience buying clothing online, certainly not when it comes to bras. The Fit Finder worked like a charm. The choice of styles, amazing. Both the bras I ordered were the perfect fit. They're incredibly comfortable and cute and subtle. Third Love knows your one true fit is out there. So right now they're offering my listeners 20% off your first order. Go to thirdlove.com/majority now to find your perfect fitting bra and get 20% off your first purchase. That's thirdlove.com/majority for 20% off. And lastly, this is one of Emma's favorites. It's Liquid IV. Are you? I'm almost done with my.
I got some Liquid IV right in here right now.
My
acai, my favorite one.
Is that how you say that?
Yeah, and then I've said this, and you've also then said, "Is that how you say that?"
I'm losing my memory, but Liquid IV has created hydration multiplier plus immune support to maintain and strengthen your immune system. Today, I am doing the energy one, but I've been mixing it back and forth a little bit. Hydration Multiplier Plus Immune Support is a cutting-edge blend of vitamin C, zinc, and Wellmune in convenient single-serving packets to help strengthen your immune system. The blend is powered by cellular transport technology, which is designed to enhance rapid absorption of water and other nutrients. Each packet is bursting with fresh, natural tangerine flavor. It tastes really good. I switch that up with my green tea matcha, it has caffeine of 2 cups of coffee, the energy one. But all of the Liquid IVs can provide 2 to 3 times more hydration than water alone. And with every purchase, Liquid IV donates a serving of Liquid IV to someone in need. The company has donated over 10 million servings globally, including over 4 million servings in response to COVID-19. When I used to travel, I would take a bunch of these with me for traveling, for jet lag. And when I'm overindulging occasionally, which happens rarely, but it happens, I hydrate myself both at night and in the morning. Good as new. And I have gotten rid of coffee and have just basically replaced it with the energy Liquid IV. All of the ingredients are just much better than some of the junky chemical ones you get in other those like energy drinks. And now you can get your Liquid IV's hydration multiplier plus immune support in bulk at Costco, or you can order online and get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code Majority Report at checkout. Oh, excuse me. Use the code Majority Rep, not Majority Report, at checkout. That's 25% off anything when you get better hydration today using promo code Majority Rep at liquidiv.com. Okay. I'd like to welcome to the program Dwight Professor of Law Jamal Greene. He is from Columbia University Law School, and his just come out with a new book. It is How Rights Went Wrong, Why Our Obsession with Rights is Tearing America Apart. Professor, welcome to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you give basically at first you start off with a history of how our, I guess, rights regime in this country developed. Didn't really necessarily come from the Constitution. I mean, let's start there and then go into the Lochner era.
Sure. And the book is really about reconciling the way we think about rights, which tends to be in pretty absolutist terms, with living in a pluralistic society. And a lot of times especially when I make this argument, I see people then invoke the framers and say, rights are absolute and rights are trumps because the framers made it so. And that's really not true. The way we think about rights as being at least presumptively absolute would have been not only foreign to a lot of the ways the members of the founding generation thought about rights, but mortifying to them insofar as we end up delegating to judges the power to decide our rights for us. And the way that the founding generation thought about it, they took rights very seriously, but they thought about rights as something that communities get together to create and to decide on the limits of, right? So when we think about the Bill of Rights, a lot of the Bill of Rights is actually about empowering self-government. It's empowering juries, empowering legislatures, even the militia, which was a form of policing, right? So empowering communities to govern themselves and set the limits of their rights. When we think about the Declaration of Independence, which talks about the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they weren't saying, and therefore we got to get judges to come in and say when those rights are activated and when they aren't. The very next sentence of the Declaration is, and that's why governments are instituted among men, is what they say, because the idea being that you get your rights from community negotiation, community deliberation, and we've lost that, and it's a long story for why we've lost that, but we shouldn't tie that idea to the founding generation.
Right, and so where did I mean, I guess this is a good time to also to expand on when we say rights. I mean, there are different types of rights, right? I mean, both rights, negative and positive rights, or maybe you don't subscribe to perceiving them that way. But when we talk about rights and when you're examining the development of these rights, just explain to us the nature of those rights just generally. Are we talking about individual rights, or is that the development that is rather novel?
Well, in a lot of ways, I'm trying to get away from the idea that when we resolve legal disputes, that the way we resolve those disputes is to decide who has a right and who doesn't have a right. That's the kind of polarizing and I think in a lot of ways destructive frame that we tend to use when there are a lot of different philosophical conceptions of what rights are. You know, you can go and take a philosophy course and figure that out, right? But when it comes down to a legal decision maker, whether it's a judge or through the political process, resolving a conflict between people, it's usually not the case that the most constructive way of resolving that conflict is to say one side has a right and the other side doesn't have a right. Usually it's much more kind of brass tacks. What I say in the book is we need to resolve these kinds of conflicts at retail rather than at wholesale, which is to say someone's got a right on one side and someone's got a right on the other side. Someone's passed a law, public health measure, a public safety law. That's trying to protect rights as much as the person who feels victimized by that law is trying to protect rights, right? So rights are in both sides of lots of disputes that we have. And it's very easy, I'm a law professor, it's very easy for me to construct an argument for why the Constitution protects the rights on both sides of just about every conflict we have. And so saying who has a right or who doesn't get us very far. And what we need to do much more of is thinking about, well, why did the government pass this law? What alternatives might there have been? Who's burdened, who isn't burdened? How far, you've got to make a judgment call about a lot of these things. And we've gotten away from that. And we feel as though we've got to sort of assign a constitutional right to one side or the other. These are retail political conflicts that we have about our rights. They're not metaphysical existential crises.
Well, I mean, that undercuts, I feel like, so much of how judges view themselves, right? I mean, there's so much judicial activism that takes place. I know you write about some of that. Can you talk about how this perception of rights, I guess, makes conflicts or disputes susceptible to kind of judges looking at things through their specific lens and tailoring them in a bit of an activist way?
Well, I hesitate to use the word activist because it's so politically charged, and one person's activist is another person's, constitutionalist or something. But I do think, to the extent that what that gets at is a kind of self-aggrandizement by judges, right? Judges feel like they are the ones who decide our rights for us. I do think that the tendency that I'm trying to criticize in the book does lead to that, right? So let's say there's a dispute about the First Amendment or about a political act, right? Or a political, so Citizens United, which we all remember that at least the name of that case, which is about an ideological corporation that wants to run an anti-Hillary Clinton movie right before the 2008 election. We frame that, lawyers frame that, the public frames that as a First Amendment case. It's a free speech case. Do corporations have free speech rights becomes the question. Judges understand themselves within our system as the ones who answer that question, and they answer it by looking at precedent, looking at the text of the Constitution, looking at maybe thinking about what the framers thought. These are kind of legalistic ways of answering those kinds of questions. Judges are essentially justifying their own authority by saying the way we resolve a dispute about a Hillary Clinton movie is by referring to text, history, precedent, lawyerly things, because why else would judges be the ones resolving these conflicts? There's no reason why that has to happen unless you commit yourself to an overly legalistic culture. So what's the other way of thinking about a conflict like Citizens United? It's to say, well, yes, there's a speech right at issue here. There's a corporation ideological corporation wants to engage in speech. There's also a political equality issue here because the government's passed a campaign finance law that's trying to equalize citizen access to the political process. So you've got constitutionally important rights on both sides of that dispute. Instead of thinking of it as just do corporations have free speech rights? Let's think of, well, are ideological corporations different from General Motors or someone who makes widgets? What is the precise burden on a company, on Citizens United, where in the case itself, it was actually about whether they had to set up a separate political action committee versus using their general treasury funds to spend money on this ad. How burdensome is that? Right? Those kinds of questions are not the kinds of questions the court answered. And in some ways, I think that's linked to the self-conception of judges as trying to decide our rights for us. And that's, I think, terribly destructive.
How would, and I want to get back to that sort of the Lochner case where this sort of I think you peg this as sort of developing, but how would how would, though, just to use your example, how would lower courts be able to address these issues? I mean, I am of the mind that the judges are doing exactly what you're saying. It's just that they, in certain instances, they don't necessarily decide in the way I want to, and they're dressing it up in some type of framework so that these future questions can be answered. But I mean, is it possible to have looked at every single case in its specifics, or don't you need some type of principle, legal principle, to maintain the architecture of the legal system? I mean, I got to say, I'm skeptical as to the sincerity of that architecture, but that is like the pretense, isn't it?
So it's a fair question, and there's a couple of questions embedded in there. So one is about precedent and how do you sort of maintain precedent we think that judges have to figure out what the rules are, right? And those rules are going to be overbroad and generalizable, and that gives advice to the lower courts. And then there's a separate question here about sincerity and about, is this all just kind of a game? And if you're just kind of, shifting the deck chairs around, does that really change anything? As to the first, I think it's really a matter of what kinds of questions does a court ask when they receive a case. So precedent can mean when I see a case like Citizens United, I've got to figure out what does the First Amendment mean? And that's an interpretive question. So you might look at the text, you might look at particular precedents around what is the scope of your free speech right? The other way of looking at this is to say, to ask a different set of questions. So what kind of law is this? What was the evidence on which this law was based? What are the purposes behind this law? What are the alternatives available? Those kinds of questions can also generate a set of precedents around the facts of the dispute. So it's different ways about thinking about facts. What are the relevant pieces of information that I need to solve this kind of case? And I'm trying to urge that information to be based on facts in the real world, as opposed to being based on legal abstractions. So on the second point, does this really affect, I'll just crudely characterize your question as, is this going to change anything? Does this affect any outcomes? If it's just a matter of, judges are just going to reach out. They're going to reach the same result anyway, and you're just urging them to dress it up differently. And that's a fair criticism. And I'm not suggesting necessarily that in all of the hot button disputes that we have, that outcomes will come out differently. I do think that what I'm trying to urge is the conversation that cases generate to focus on a different set of questions. So just to go back to that Citizens United example, if I'm left of center, right? If you ask me, do you believe in corporate speech rights or do you believe in political equality, right? I'm going to say I believe in political equality. And you ask someone right of center that question, they might very well answer it differently. And so that in that way, that the case just recreates the same kind of ideological disputes that we have. But if you ask me, should an ideological corporation be able to use its general treasury funds to fund a movie that a video on demand movie that so people only get it if they ask for it in the weeks leading up to an election where they're criticizing one of the candidates, I might be able to go for that. And so might my right of center friend, right? So there are ways in which we can dial down, depending on the kinds of questions we ask, dial down some of the conflict that we have around. We can talk about consent where we have consensus and where we don't. We might still reach different judgments in cases. Of course, we're all different people, right? But there are ways in which judges and other legal decision makers can help with dialing down the temperature of political conflict, and there are ways they can hurt. And I think right now they're hurting.
I want to circle back to that premise, which is the central premise of the book. But let's go to the Lochner case, where you cite that case as being sort of, I guess, the beginning of the development of this notion of or I don't know if it's the beginning of the development, but it's really when it starts to sort of come to the fore in terms of the development of rights on some level.
So sure, yeah. So the Lochner case, and I don't know how familiar your audience will be with this case. It's one of these things that all lawyers know, but most non-lawyers don't know.
Well, they should be, but we'll see.
But it's a very important case where New York passes a law that says that you can't work more than 10 hours a day or 60 hours a week in a bake shop, and passes unanimously in the New York legislature. It's a health and safety measure and a labor law, and the Supreme Court strikes it down. And this case is understood as sort of standing in for an era of, I'll go back to Emma's word, judicial activism, where judges are reaching out to apply their ideological lens to the sort of laissez-faire economics ideological lens to lawmaking. And within the legal culture of the United States in the middle of the 20th century and beyond, we think of that case as being just egregiously wrongly decided. Every member of the Supreme Court today will say that the Lochner decision is wrongly decided. And
is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
I worry. I mean, there's some, right? I mean, don't we have to let's put it this way, not as vociferously as maybe the Supreme Court 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago.
I think that's fair. And there are certainly elements of the conservative legal movement that would not say that Lochner is wrongly decided. I think that they haven't made it to that group hasn't quite made it to the Supreme Court. And so it's still a mainstream position, I'll say, that Lochner is the worst of the worst. And conservatives and liberals tend to pick at different parts of it. But what it does in our history is it sets out one strand of thinking about rights. And opposition to Lochner ends up taking the form of when the government is engaged in certain kinds of social and economic legislation, you just let them do it. Because if you don't let them do it, you're going to be making lots of judgment calls in the way that the Lochner court did. And the Lochner court is wrong. And so we should give deference to the government. But there's, of course, another strand that says when rights are at stake, of course, you don't give deference to the government. And that strand is the Jim Crow strand, right? So middle of the 20th century, Brown versus Board of Education. You don't trust the government at all, right? So we have these two competing notions of rights in our head. that results from just the baggage of American history, one of which says you defer entirely to legislatures, and the other of which says you defer not at all to legislatures. And what ends up happening in the 1960s and 1970s is you get a lot more rights cases that don't fit comfortably in either of those categories, right? So you get a birth control law, or a law where someone's challenging the government taking away their welfare, or someone's trying to burn a draft card in protest of the Vietnam War, and that's being criminalized. So do you defer entirely to the government because the government should always be able to, penalize, to decide on people's welfare rights however they want, or do you defer not at all to the government because important rights are at stake? Well, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And we never really constructed a language for dealing with the mine run of rights cases, which are between the extremes of no deference to the government at all and complete deference to the government.
So I'm just trying to understand that. Like in the Lochner case, the idea was that the Supreme Court was saying that the right to enter into a contract needs to be is sacrosanct and can't be impeded by government. And then in Jim Crow, you have people saying that is it really just a question of like whether or not you defer to the government, or is it that, well, the basis in which, in Jim Crow, for instance, we have a whole series of amendments that came out through Reconstruction to the Constitution that the Constitution trumps. It seems to me far more explicit in terms of rolling back Jim Crow laws than it would in protecting the sacrosanctness of contract. I mean, isn't that what that comes down to? I mean, aren't you flattening these a little bit as just a response to I should or should not defer to the government, or is your argument that that's what happened, that it was flattened?
So my argument is that that's what happened, is that it ended up being flattened in that way, even though rights are much more contextual than that. So a couple of things on what you said. So one is the way to think about Jim Crow versus Lochner just a matter of what's explicit? I think not. I think both of those are 14th Amendment cases, and the 14th Amendment doesn't, at least Section 1 of the 14th Amendment doesn't mention race at all. And the people who wrote the Lochner case thought they were interpreting that same amendment in that same section as the people who, as the Brown court. Now, I of course think Brown is rightly decided, and I think Lochner is wrongly decided. But I don't think that the reason why one is rightly decided and one is wrongly decided is one involved rights and the other one didn't. I think they both involve rights. I think the right to contract is a right that people have and should have, and it's very easy to specify it constitutionally. But it just doesn't go nearly as far as the Lochner court thought it went. And that's in fact what the Lochner court said. It didn't quite say that the right was sacrosanct. It said it depends on whether the government has good reasons or not. And there were two dissenting opinions, and one of them said, well, yeah, that's right. There is a right to contract, and it just depends on whether the government has good reasons or not. But I think the government did have good reasons. That's Justice Harlan's dissent in Lochner. The much more famous dissent is Justice Holmes's dissent, where he basically says, no, there is no right to contract. This is a silly case. And that dissent ends up being the one that kind of defines that strand of rights thinking in the United States. For lots of, again, historically contingent reasons having to do with Felix Frankfurter being a Holmes acolyte and kind of distributing pro-Holmes views to all of his disciples. But that's the way legal education ends up working. And when we get to the 1960s, everyone's running away from the idea that you can have kind of rights that aren't complete, right? The right to contract, which Justice Harlan would have said, yeah, this is a right, but it's limited. That language of this is a right, but it's limited, ends up sort of not having any traction in US constitutional law. It does have lots of traction elsewhere in the world. And I think, and there are a number of comparative examples in the book, I think quite productively has a lot of traction elsewhere in the world. And what it comes down to is, look, when you live in a complex pluralistic society, everyone can't have absolute rights, right? So because they're going to conflict all the time. And so you have to decide, either everyone kind of has partial rights that are kind of resolved, mediated is the word I use in the book, or you have to decide who has rights and who doesn't. And we've ended up picking the latter, and that's really polarizing. And I think it's not something that judges, going back to Emma's question, it ends up giving judges an awful lot of power over who ends up being a rights holder. It's one thing to have power over who wins this case, but power over who gets to be a rights holder is power that judges should not have.
And so let's talk about that proportionality analysis and this idea of reconciling rights and how it plays out in other countries. You write about Germany, particularly in the context of abortion rights. Walk us through that. And also, I'm curious as to whether it's because they have a fundamentally different legal system in the way that just even like plaintiffs come to the court or defendants, and the way that the judges perceive, they don't have necessarily the same sort of adversarial qualities necessarily that we do. Will you explain, walk us through that?
Sure. I'll there are a number of different comparative examples. And Germany, as you mentioned, there's a whole chapter on German abortion jurisprudence, which I can say something about. But Canada is also an example that I refer to a number of times. And the Canadian legal system is pretty similar to the US legal system in terms of how cases are brought, the structure of the Supreme Court, the structure of lower courts. And sometimes when I make this argument, people worry about chaos, right? And Canada is not a chaotic legal system. I mean, they work it out. So anytime, if part of the concern is, the German system is too far from ours, well, there's also Canada. So the Germany case, so I talk a bit about abortion rights, and I'm always try to be cautious when I talk about this issue, and particularly whether we can make progress on this issue. I don't know if we can. All right, so the chapter means to say, look, there was a moment in the 1970s when there were some choices that courts could make about how to structure abortion rights jurisprudence. And German courts, and courts in a number of other places as well, but German courts in particular, made a choice to say, we're gonna think about rights being on both sides of this dispute, right? So the Constitution protects the value of fetal life, and that's a very important, I'll call it a right, they wouldn't use quite that word, but protects the value of fetal life, and it also protects the autonomy of women. And so the way this dispute has to be resolved is in a way that respects both of those. The government has to respect both of those. And what ends up happening is that the political conversation in the German context responds to that by arriving at a consensus topic of conversation that responds to both of those things, which is, how do you give women more genuine choices, right? So if you are from the anti-abortion rights side, and someone says you've got to respect women's autonomy, they say, well, how about we respect women's autonomy by making sure that abortion restrictions don't arrive till the second trimester, for example. And so you've got basically liberalized abortion access in the first trimester, but the second trimester, you need to have a particular reason. And from the other side, the pro-abortion rights side, well, we think that the way that if you're going to restrict abortion rights, you've got to make sure that women are actually given genuine choice, right? So do they have prenatal care, right? Do they have postnatal care? Do they have child care? Do they have employment guarantees? If you want to save the life of a fetus, right? The way to save the life of a fetus is not to restrict abortion. That's going to lead the practice underground, right? The way to save the life of a fetus is to make a woman make a different choice, or to incentivize her to make a different choice, to make her life easier as a parent. And so there's a grand compromise, political compromise, spurred on by court decisions around, and people with very different views about abortion rights, construct a regime. And the regime is, pretty liberal access in the first trimester, funding for people who have trouble paying for abortion access, which isn't a thing at all in the U.S. In the second trimester, it's an indications model, right? So, if there's a medical reason or a health reason, or then you can get a so-called indicated abortion. Look, lots of people are not going to like that regime, right? Lots of people are going to think it should be more liberalized. Lots of people are going to think it should be less liberalized. But the point of the chapter is to say that the court decisions spurred a political solution, so that and vastly lowered the temperature of the issue, so that in the 1970s, abortion was a more controversial topic in Germany than it was in the United States in the early 1970s. And today it's not even, it's just not, they're two different universes. And you can trace ways in which court decisions contributed to that. Roe versus Wade happens the same time as that German case that I referred to, more or less the same time. But there the court insists that we can't think of fetal life as having any constitutional value. Because if we did, and since we think of rights in this sort of almost absolute sort of way, then that would mean that the women can't possibly have their own abortion rights. The court doesn't have the imagination to think of those things as coexisting. And that actually ends up fairly directly dividing the anti-abortion movement between people who were much more moderate forces within that movement in the early 1970s, and they get kind of kicked out of the movement by much more extreme activists who call for constitutional amendments and changing the court and all sorts of things. So it's not to say that, this is such a polarizing issue today, right, that it's hard to know exactly what to do with it, but it's to say there were other options, and there's some evidence that those options led to a much more productive way of thinking about this issue.
Does this conception of rights, I guess, I mean, it I think allows for judicial power to be more ubiquitous, as you're getting at, and that then it necessarily needs to be in the United States. And it's almost like we're, with this new conception of rights that you're laying out, it's kind of asking judges to relinquish some sort of discretion and power that they seem to wield, I think, with more enthusiasm than perhaps you'd like. I'm just trying to see how they could adjust their perspective, because them, behaving in this way, it kind of suits their power interests, does it not? This conception.
Well, in a sense, I mean, I think how the power plays out. One of the lines in the book is, judges should recognize more rights, but they should be less strong, right? So they should be more willing to say there are rights at stake here, but less willing to say that means that resolves the case, because the case will get resolved in other ways. There are ways of characterizing that as judges grabbing more power, right? And I think sometimes the argument is characterized that way. Sam mentioned positive rights earlier in the conversation. This way of thinking is much more open to the possibility of positive rights, so right to health or right to education. Right? There might be circumstances under which it makes sense for courts to step in and say, the state doesn't have a good enough reason for not providing this vital resource to people. I talk about from the 1970s, a well-known case out of San Antonio involving the use of local property taxes to fund local schools, where there's an equal protection, an equality challenge, and a right to education challenge brought against that. And it loses. And part of the reason it loses is the judges say, it's a 5-4 case. Lewis Powell, who writes the majority opinion, just says, look, we can't, he's a big anti-communist, right? He says, look, this would be communism. Like, we can't have equality of all the positive resources that are provided by the government. And so therefore that must not be a right, right? And what I want to say is that kind of reasoning, you can say that something's a right, but also say that doesn't mean that courts are going to order the government to provide it absolutely and to everyone. These schools were, sort of manifestly unequal, and there are ways of making them more equal. And, judges have to do what they can within their resources to help that. So in that sense, whether they're getting more power or not sort of depends on the case and depends on how we're thinking about their power. I want their power to be continuous with political power, which is to say, the kinds of things that judges are talking about should be the same kinds of things that politicians are talking about when they talk about the resources available to particular schools in a case like the San Antonio case. What I worry about is judges converting what is actually a political dispute on which they have a role to play, right? They can set the bounds of that politics, but converting that political dispute into a question of like, where are the commas in the Constitution, which is not what the dispute is about. That's an abstraction.
Is there a chicken and egg? Like I'm curious as to whether we find ourselves in this dynamic, and I certainly, the idea that these political fights are being turned into sort of more, into argument about rights resonates with me. But is this not by design? I mean, the idea that, I don't think it's, and I understand, abortion is sort of almost a unique issue, but in some ways it's unique because it was meant to be unique. That the reason why it was more contentious in Germany in the 1970s is because there was yet to be, a movement that chose abortion as the sort of vanguard of that movement, when it was really ultimately about taxation and being able to segregate your colleges and still get a tax, a freedom, you didn't have to pay, a tax as an educational institution. Like, aren't we looking at the product of a political machination rather than a native impulse within judges, but rather the assertion of politics onto our judiciary?
So yes, I mean, it's an astute point, and I think it's right to a degree. But what I'd say is there politicians are going to politic, right? They're going to be opportunistic. And the abortion story is certainly an example of that. But from my perspective, as a lawyer, as a law professor, as someone who can try to make an intervention from my corner of the world, there are ways of making that opportunism easier and more efficient, and there are ways of making it less efficient. And there's only so much courts can do. I'm not a utopian about courts or someone who thinks that they can solve all our problems, but they can make them worse. And I try to track a lot of ways in which that's happened, both in the 1970s and today, within the book. And so there are lots of problems with our politics, and there are lots of and by the way, I'll say opportunism is inherent in politics, right? It's not something that's always a problem, right? But I'm trying to say, what can the legal system do? How can it make things better rather than making things worse? It's not going to solve our problems. How can they shape conversations? Are they leaving money on the table? And I think there are a lot of ways in which they are.
Jamal Greene, the author of How Rights Went Wrong, Why Our Obsession with Rights is Tearing America Apart. We'll put a link to your book at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well.
All right, folks. Going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more after this. Okay, just wrapping things up here. We should get to, I want to get to this last clip, Emma, because there is Joe Biden has come out with or starting to roll out a climate plan, which in many respects, I think people would agree is less than sufficient for what we need. And certainly in terms of executing things, we need to pace this up, folks. And however, the right in this country have deployed a fairly threadbare, but maybe successful tactics in some respect. They have decided that Joe Biden's plan means no more hamburgers. It's the same thing that they said with the Green New Deal. And Larry Kudlow has got a little twist on it. And here it is.
Of our power. Speaking of stupid, there's a study coming out of the University of Michigan which says that to meet the Biden Green New Deal targets, America has to, get this, America has to stop eating meat, stop eating poultry, fish, seafood, eggs, dairy, and animal-based fats. Okay, we got that? No burgers on July 4th. No steaks on the Barbie. I'm sure Middle America is just going to love that. Can you grill those Brussels sprouts? So get ready. You can throw back a plant-based beer with your grilled Brussels sprouts and wave your American flag. Call it July 4th green.
No more meat
making
beer?
fun of this because I intend to make fun of it. This kind of thinking is stupid.
Okay.
It comes from a bunch of ideological zealots.
It's stupid.
Listen, first off, the alcohol content in the meat laced beer is super high.
This is venison beer.
I was about to say venison. I was trying to think of the grossest meat possible.
The best part about this is he's sitting there and at least he has the integrity to say, like, this is actually going to be concerning people in the Midwest. Like, because basically, like, God knows the last time he got in front of a barbecue, or for that matter, had a beer ever, that he is
Also,
surprised to find out that beer is plant-based, apparently.
Yeah, he definitely seems more like a brown liquor kind of guy. And also, I'm pretty sure that they barbecue on the East Coast and the West Coast as well. And what they're taking this from, by the way, CNN did a fact check, is a Daily Mail article that cited that study that Biden didn't put out himself at all. It's just about meat consumption in regards to climate change, a separate study. And then they're just pinning it to the Biden administration, claiming they said it when they didn't.
Incidentally. And I will also say that Brussels sprouts are awesome. And I imagine that they grow them also in the Midwest, and they're just as awesome in the Midwest as they are here on the East Coast.
You're really going to die on the Brussels sprouts are awesome.
It's actually my favorite vegetable.
Asparagus, broccoli, spinach, all those better, but whatever.
But there it is. No, he's going to make fun of this because he doesn't want to be drinking any of those.
Get a lamb chop IPA.
All right, we got to go. We'll be back tomorrow for those of you who are leaving us. We'll see you then. And for those of you who are staying, we're going to keep talking like Larry Kudlow for the entire front half of the show. And I'm just going to have some my Poisson beer is what I'm having today. My fish-based beer. That is really stunning that nobody caught that.
Have you ever heard of Dogfish IPA? You know what's in that?
Well, I don't want to know.
Both dog and fish.
I mean, that is, did no one pick that up at Fox Business? Is there nobody there?
I think when it's Larry Kudlow speaking the way that he talks, you kind of tune out after a while and just assume that it's approximating speech.
Did the boss just say plant-based beer like it was some type of weird thing? I thought hops. It's hops. I thought it was a rabbit. I thought it was rabbit-based beer. I don't know if it's ever occurred to me to grill Brussels sprouts, but I am psyched to do that.
Well, grilling vegetables is good.
Oh, without a doubt. What is the vegetables that you generally grill? Like I've grilled carrots and peppers and
peppers. I feel like is the most frequent. Yeah.
Here's the key.
I like asparagus a lot. I haven't done it. My mom, I don't have a grill in Brooklyn.
I oven roast asparagus.
Asparagus is good to grill. Here's a little tip on the peppers. You grill them without cutting them up. You cut them up afterwards.
Oh.
Yep. There you go. That's it for the day. That and the fact that beer does not come from any meat-based products. So you should know that. I don't think there's any. I'm not trying to think of like, I can imagine like if someone ever put butter in beer or something, but I don't think so.
Only in Harry Potter.
Yeah, that's what I'm
There we
thinking
go,
about.
Matt.
I got Harry Potter on the mind. That's they're
Wait, what book is Saul on?
5. Number 5.
5 was my favorite.
It's the darkest one, Matt.
Yeah,
When
that's
he's
why I
all
like it.
Harry's all moody in that one.
And there's a secret society.
Yeah.
That is
the
cool.
DA, right? That's what they call it. The DA.
Dumbledore's army. Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's cooler when you just call it DA though.
Oh yeah. Well, I just throw it off. It's no biggie. Folks, just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you support not only the free show, you get the free show free of commercials. You also get the fun half. And we got a Discord now. Kyle said he would stop giving me constant updates on the number of people in there, but it is a lot. I'm trying to see how many people we have in there. I'm going to start to dip in now a little bit when I don't have primary responsibility. There are times where I do not have the children at that point, and then I will dip in. But if you go to majoritydiscord.com, you can sign up and get in on the fun. We have now over 1,600 members, 480 of whom are online as we speak. Head over there. People are talking about the grilled asparagus being wonderful. So there you go. And that's that. So check that out. And don't forget amquickie.com. Get your 6 minutes of headlines, amquickie.com every morning. And justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Nomi is back tomorrow. The Noma Key Show on YouTube, youtube.com/The Noma Key Show. Check that out, folks. Matt, what's happening in the Leckian media universe?
Yeah, this weekend for patrons of Left Reckoning, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, we talked to Wes Cheek about natural disasters, quote, natural disasters, and the phrase building back better. Did you guys know that was a disaster relief phrase? I did not know that that's the context that comes from. We talk about.
Who are you talking to about that?
Wes Cheek at Wes in Japan. He's a researcher. He formerly at Tulane. Now he's in Japan. And we talked to him. He's great on Twitter, also great follow. But we talked to him about how capitalism basically takes advantage of natural disasters.
Wait, wasn't
there was
it
a piece in Current Affairs on that, by the way, just the Build Back Better thing that I did. Go on, Sam.
Wasn't Wes?
He did do that one. Yep.
He gave us the Fukushima updates.
Yep. That's Wes.
That's when the show launched. Wes became our first, I think, official correspondent.
Oh wow! I didn't even know that. That was before my time.
Unofficial. But we would get updates from him as he was traveling Japan.
Very smart guy.
Very smart. All right, folks. We will see you in the fun half.
C'est tu le poupée qui fait nanana toute la journée.
Wow, I just got word. I just got word that Tim Heidecker is now ripping off our set. Should we pop that up for a moment? This is, I mean, I'm not surprised, to be honest with you. But apparently he had an Oscar show and his site crashed. And I was going to mock him a little bit for that on Twitter, but I remember back in the early aughts when we would have, 4,000 or 5,000 people come to our website, and we were barely prepared for that. Of course, that was 20 years ago. You would imagine that the technology has improved. But pop up, Tim Heidecker, for all his supposed funny barbs, really, when it came time to having set up his set, there he goes. Just gonna steal it from Sam Seder and hope nobody notices. Maybe if we put a couple of couches in front of it, nobody will pay attention to it. So I don't know. That's pretty disappointing.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, people should take IP a little bit more seriously, in my opinion.
I made a really, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I hope that this color right here, this one right here, this blue right here is trademarked. So
you'll actually have never seen that shade before anywhere. We made that in a lab.
Didn't exist. We got a color consultant, and we mixed a bunch of that stuff around, and that's basically what happened. So, boom. How does a guy from Massachusetts not know about oyster beer, says James in Jersey City? Well, it's true. There is a beer that you brew with oyster shells, not actual oysters. But don't forget, hit the like button and subscribe, says MIDI Doctors. Let's see. Somebody was going to, I missed the IM. Somebody had IM'd that they had a beef with the crew for not laughing at my hops. I thought it was bunny joke. So
I did see that in the IMs. But
yeah, to be fair, I did. I must have been thinking of my own joke when you said that.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's go right to the phones today. Let's go call from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. I think it would be funnier if you tried to guess who I am. Go ahead, try to guess.
Jeff in Georgia, ladies and gentlemen.
Damn. How did you do that? That was amazing. Hey, Sam,
I thought it was George W. Bush.
Yeah, it was either George Bush or Jeff in Georgia.
Perhaps another time we could go into a bit of crackerology on the different Southern accents. I actually have a coastal honky accent. George W. Bush is more of a Texas accent. It's more of some kind of thing. Sam actually does a really fine W impression. You should get him to do it more often on the show, I think.
Well, I think, George Bush was not around. The last time I think he came up was really during the when we were making fun of Jeb.
Yep.
That was one of my favorites. We were where Michael was doing Jeb and I was doing George, just crapping all over him with Mom.
And Michael would always do.
I remember that.
Yeah,
you were making
Mother.
me feel nostalgic for so many feelings right now, because that was actually the only kind of Trump that my favorite kind of Trump really was the Jeb, you're weak, you can't do one push-up kind of Trump. Hey man, I just wanted to tell you two things, I guess. The first is that it happened a while ago, but it was very nice for you not to totally laugh uncontrollably at the suggestion that I might appear on the show on camera one day. That was fun. I really liked that. It was very flattering of you not to totally laugh that suggestion off the air.
I would never laugh at that.
Beautiful.
No, I would never laugh at that. when we get back into studio, we're going to start to, sort of like try and figure a lot of that out. But, I want to be able to have folks in the studio too. But I would encourage everyone to go to Dissonant Peasant and listen and watch. Are you doing, are you twitching yet?
Yes, I got basically 2 projects going. I got a Twitch channel with 2 of my buddies, Kenny and Bro Bra, at Post Revolution. You can check that out. And also, I still run the solo podcast at distantpeasant.com, where I mostly just talk about history. Right now, I'm reading and explaining and expounding upon Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. The last part I did was when things got really good. There was a civil war. America won. The Confederacy lost. I will tell you how that happened exactly, without going into a whole bunch of battles about field cannons and drunk commanders and stuff, which is what everyone else does. The other thing I wanted to tell you today is just that I really appreciate the interviews and the guests that you have on. A lot of political content on Twitch, podcasts, YouTube. It could be called nerd shit, I guess. It's a little bit, but I like nerd shit, specifically about rights, how we think about them, what they should mean in America. And, speaking of Reconstruction in America, like, I think what we've kind of lost, and it seems a little bit quaint, is that one right sort of that we've lost sight of is a right to land, because land gives sustenance, or so it was thought at the time. You can farm it, you can make it productive, you can participate in your economy to support a family with it, right? But the idea that like everyone is entitled to some share of this sort of sustenance is totally gone the way of the dodo, just as much, if not more so, than the idea that we should all have our own homesteads. I'll let you talk about that off the air if you want, but I had that kind of question for you, what you thought about that.
About the loss of that from Reconstruction. I mean, if Reconstruction and if Johnson wasn't president, we'd be living in a very, very different country now, I think. If Reconstruction had held, Johnson wasn't president, and there was, and I think we are living in a different country because of it. I still contend that era was sort of like our legit founding era, but so many of those ideas were lost. And I think, I don't know, it has never occurred to me, but if, there may have been as much about the loss of what was going on that era in terms of like promoting the lost cause. There may have been as much about like, concern by oligarchs of the time that this stuff is moving slightly in a disadvantaged way for them. I mean, it's
yeah, absolutely.
It's stunning to me how much of that era is memory hold in this country.
Because to me, there's a sort of turn that happens where people talk less and less about the idea that like we should all have access to this land because it makes us truly free to do as we wish in the world. And the idea that, well, actually, the most important thing is that the people who already have land and property, needs to be respected. That's really what the right to that sustenance means. Those who have get to keep it with very limited sort of circumstances extenuating.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting. I don't know that I've read anything about that specific theme, and I wonder if I wonder how much Roosevelt, when he was talking about his 4 freedoms, right? How much of that came from those ideas?
Man, Sam, you're my favorite Yankee. You call him Roosevelt. I love you, man.
There you go. All right. Well, I appreciate it, Jeff. Why do people call him Roosevelt?
I appreciate it, y'all.
Yeah, I guess I call him Roosevelt.
I have never heard Roosevelt in my life.
Have a fantastic week, everybody. I love the show.
Bye-bye, Jeff.
Is Roosevelt like a? I've only ever heard Roosevelt.
What? Well, I mean, to each their own. I don't know what to tell you. I mean,
no,
Roosevelt.
I was just curious if it was a northern southern thing. I don't know.
Calling from a 308 area code. 308. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Kowalski from Nebraska.
All the greatest hits today, folks. Kowalski in Nebraska. Roosevelt or Roosevelt?
It's just FDR.
There you go. You can avoid that. Very
about
well
Teddy?
done. Very
What about Teddy?
diplomatic.
Well, that's Teddy. It's Teddy and FDR, because if you say the last name, you could, confuse the two.
Gotcha.
What do you got?
Well, that's my view anyway. Just wanted to give you a little bit of ag updates because that's my thing now. Southwest drought is getting way, way worse. That's where most of our vegetable production is done from. So we will probably see a lot of price hikes in the price of food. The drought up in the Dakotas is getting worse, which is going to hit the wheat crop pretty hard. And today, grain markets are going to have to probably shut down early because they have all reached to their peaks that they're allowed to go up in a day. Because the agricultural forecast looks very bleak for production. The United States will likely have to import soybeans from Brazil before harvest to make up for shortfalls, and Brazil is probably going to have to import U.S. corn. Rarely has this ever happened in the past because we're the two biggest exporting food nations in the world. So, yeah, that's going to be rather significant. Prices for most commodities have almost doubled from last year.
Wow.
Yeah. So plant gardens, people, because we need to spread this irrigation load around the entire country. Another thing to keep in mind with the Southwest drought, that is where a majority of our vegetables, which is like basically, your staples that go straight to the plate, are all located basically in a desert. The reservoirs have not been replenished since basically we've been in like a long-term drought spell since like 2012. And the area basically has not recovered yet. So that's going to mean more intense irrigation this year, which is going to hurt their water resources even more. So, yeah, we're going to really have to rethink ag policy because we cannot just keep growing food out in the desert because we want to use cheap migrant labor.
Is that basically
Gates has it under control?
Is that basically why we grow it in the Southwest is because easy to get migrant labor as opposed to, I don't know, the Midwest?
It's good climate because you can do 2 crops a year and most of it, or even yearly crops because of how warm it is. But the labor part of it is really big. Like the Netherlands is the largest food exporter, I think, in all of Europe when it comes to like direct produce, and it's because they have massive greenhouses. That's pretty much the model the U.S. should just adapt nationwide to just spread that load out, because from a technical standpoint, vegetable production in the U.S. has greater water damage than cattle production because it's just isolated in one area, whereas cows are spread across about half the continent. So like it's technical, but yeah, that it's in that area because the weather's good. They've got cheap labor, and as long as the rivers don't run dry, they will have irrigation. But yeah, if this drought persists, we will see higher food prices. The U.S. will probably never suffer an actual shortage of food because we are such a massive exporter. But the other countries we export to could potentially see rationing if this keeps up for more than a couple of years.
Great. When you say greenhouses, is that hydroponic or is it is it in soil?
It could be both. It just depends on what you're growing and where you're at, what you're going to use to heat it. In the Midwest and Great Plains, there's going to be an abundance of natural gas. So for ones are better using natural gas would probably pop up out here. The problem with the Great Plains is we don't have the labor to do it. So that would probably have to be more towards the east and like the upper Midwest or even out on the East Coast.
Interesting.
Yes. And could I shamelessly plug my YouTube channel if you don't mind?
Of course.
All right. So I started a channel. It's just called Prairie Fire. So far, I've only posted like 1-minute short videos that show a little of the farming stuff that I've been doing. And I'm going to try keeping that up day to day. So
all right.
I'm going to eventually do some longer stuff that'll go into like greater detail of farm policy. But for now, that's all I can do. So
say it again, the URL.
my channel is just Prairie Fire, and the videos I have are all titled Farm Stuff Shorts for now. So if you type all that in, you should find it.
Kowalski's Prairie Fire. Appreciate the call, man.
All right. You all have a good one.
Good luck. Let's do some IMs and then we'll get to Ben Shapiro. Great American. Kristen Zenema. Sam, did you know that donuts weren't invented until 1918? Can you imagine a world without donuts? There's a lot of stuff that was pre-1918. Hard to imagine living without. No way out. Sam, you deplorable ass clown. You look like the before picture for every self-improvement product ever. I can't believe you didn't remember how to say John Bonaire's name. I mean, come on. He hasn't been out of Congress all that long. Anyway, to help you out, it's pronounced no me key. Thank you. Chabruscheka. Is the BLM corruption controversy another made-up issue, or did the executive director really buy 3 houses using donation money? To be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know. Matt, are you on that at all?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I would say a good rule of thumb is donate to local community organizations and not the national, because I've heard critiques of the national BLM organization generally. I'm not sure about the specifics there.
That's generally how I operate with I try and go as local as possible. Pre-last Tana, what would you ask if you could ask Biden anything? What would you ask if you could ask Biden anything?
I don't know. I don't know if he'd be I'd be very interested in any of his answers.
Yeah. Does he have to answer truthfully, or can he answer like a politician?
Yeah, I mean, that's the
I'd ask him why the hell he hasn't canceled any student loan debt yet.
I would ask more like, do you really think that that you don't have the authority to cancel student loan? Or I think I would probably say, like, do you really think that it is more efficient way of getting the most people health insurance to subsidize the ACA versus expanding Medicare, for instance?
I'd ask him, student debt canceller says what? And then when he said what, he'd have to cancel student loan debt.
Oh my God, that would be awesome. And then you'd get all the credit for him doing that.
Well, I mean, that's primarily why I'm in this industry, right? To get credit.
If you could, honestly, if you could trick Joe Biden that way into canceling student debt, I think you deserve that credit. Don't be modest about it.
I wouldn't be.
If you could do the old student debt canceller says what joke, and you get him into it and he's locked in, if everybody knows that's contractual. Mini Apple. In Ireland, Bill Gates has created an organization called Eco Early Education Initiative. It's specifically targeted to educate young people about climate change, mostly teenagers. If so, it's so self-segregating. Only the children from the richest schools attended the meetings and learned nothing. He is a malignant force. Sam, it's pretty obvious as an observer that Mila is reselling bras to her friends. If she's doing that, which is very possible, she's not selling it just to her friends. She's selling it on Depop. Train Boy, surgery is happening now. Wish me luck. Good luck, Train Boy. Here is a shofar. Let us know how it works out. Good luck. Write this down. It seems Biden's approval rating has dropped off quite a bit, 54% approval rating. I got to dig into this polling a little bit more, but it is pretty fascinating when you look into the polling that he gets high marks on just about everything that he's done, short of, like the border stuff has triggered, some, but these are all Republicans. These are none of the people who voted for him. And many of them are never going to vote for him under any circumstance. They like the checks. Thank you for the checks. Thank you for but they're never going to support him. All of that, I think he's bleeding, for the most part, Republican voters. but I need to dig into it more. I think he's probably got enough, I think the passage of this next, we will have a sense, I think, by summer as to where, how frustrated people on the left are going to start getting with him. And I mean broadly, where you would start to see it in polling. Will from Mississippi. Last night, during Tim Heidecker's fraudulent Oscar special, he had the set backdrop suspiciously similar to MR's. Heidecker is out of control with his disrespect for the show and its community. You're absolutely right. He's disgusting. He's disgusting. MIDI Doctors. Hey, Sam, don't forget to remind everybody. Oh, yeah, okay. I saw that. Rampaging Toaster. Have you seen Mean Girls yet? Watch it with the kids. You guys have no idea. First of all, my daughter and my son are not going to sit down at the same time to watch anything. They just won't.
Mila's definitely seen it already.
Mila's probably already seen it. Saul wanted to watch The Croods this weekend. So we watched The Croods.
Oh, The Croods.
Yeah.
Is that a good one?
I don't know.
Have you seen Soul yet? Did that win last night at the Oscars? Best animated?
What?
The movie Soul?
I did not know the Oscars were happening until 8:30 p.m. when someone contacted me and said that Tim Heidecker's website was down. I was like, is tonight the Oscars? I had no.
I haven't seen, I usually used to go to the movies all the time. And
and
now
then the pandemic came and you don't find yourself going as much.
Well, I don't find myself watching the Oscar movies on demand. It's just not the same experience. I guess it kind of takes me. I don't know. I feel bad saying that. I did watch Judas and the Black Messiah, though. I'd recommend that for everybody.
Oh, I watched that too. That was good.
Good, yeah.
Was that nominated?
Yeah, and Daniel Kaluuya won Best Supporting Actor.
Oh, good.
Although honestly, I thought it should have been Lakeith Stanfield, but they both were excellent.
I don't know any of the names of the people in the movies.
The guy who played Fred Hampton won.
He was great.
Yeah.
Kid tested Politburo. Pretty sure Larry threw back some plant-based liquids before the segment. Grilled Brussels sprouts and bacon, fake bacon. It's fantastic. Asparagus and zucchinis grilled is good. Yeah. Militant apathy. Grilled Brussels sprouts actually very tasty, especially the little burnt pieces. Oven roasted Brussels sprouts are incredible. Yes. Cut them in half, toss them in with canola oil, coarse ground, salt, and pepper. Yep. And toss them with bacon fat, he says. All right. The crass rebuttal. He knows beer is vegan, right? Laugh my ass off. Reports came out over the weekend that Val Demings is considering a run against DeSantis or Rubio next year. Is she a progressive champion? No. Is she a vast improvement over DeSantis or Rubio? Yes.
Yes.
So if she runs, progressives should support her in Florida.
Well, we should support the most progressive candidate in the primary. And then if the progressive candidate doesn't get through, then you can support Val Demings.
Thank you. New year, new rear. What the hell do they think beer is made of? Beef? It's all grains. Jewish Spacealizer. What kind of cokehead can't figure out how to grill Brussels sprouts? Country Mouse. TR considered his branch of the family to be the Roosevelts, and the Hudson Valley branch the Roosevelts. Male Berber. Brussels sprouts are clearly the best vegetables. Shayna Lynn, Team Brussels sprout for the win, Sam. Small percentage of beers use honey for the fining process because it sticks to particulates. That said, the vast majority of beers don't and are therefore plant-based, says Bernie Sandwiches. Glass Seagull, Columbia Law grad here. The biggest problem with our judicial system is it relates to politics, is all the fictional structures we are expected to take for granted and respect, and too much theorizing about rights plays into that. The way to solve it is for Congress to step in and crush the ambit of the court's power into teeny tiny garbage cube. Yeah, I agree with that. Cranium. I always wondered why Emma loves the Knicks so much. After hearing she doesn't like Brussels sprouts, now I know she has no taste. Whoa.
Horrible. The Knicks have won 9 straight, more than any active streak in the NBA right now. And I know it's a painful existence, but I had no choice. Okay. My dad's a big Knicks fan. In fact, that's the only sport he's really into. And so that was like, whatever. So the rest of the stuff's just organically me. Rangers and Giants. So I put it on myself. Go on. I'm shutting up.
Hey, Sam, yesterday was the 47th anniversary of the Portuguese Revolution. Oh, I'm sorry, Emma.
Thank
a
you.
peaceful revolution by some branches of the military, but that still reminds us of our history with colonialism, suppression of rights, and police state. Can I get a shofar for the revolution and my birthday last Saturday? Sure. As you know, the House passed, what was it, HB 51, is it? HR 51?
Yes.
HR 51 is the House resolution to grant statehood to Washington, D.C. We have how many 100,000 people there?
700,000.
700, yeah, 700,000 people in Washington, D.C., the size of many states. And there's no representation, or at least no voting representation. And how does Ben Shapiro deal with that concept? Well, if you want representation with your taxation, just move.
So constitutionally speaking, there has to be a federal district. That federal district has historically been Washington, D.C. And there are lots of people who live within Washington, D.C. So what Democrats are trying to do now is they've passed a bill. It passed 216 to 210, with all the Democrats voting in favor and all the Republicans voting against. And that bill basically would take the area that is directly outside of the federal buildings, and then it would carve it off and call it its own state. Now, that's perfectly ridiculous. It's perfectly ridiculous because if you wanted that area to be incorporated into a state, you could totally do that. I have a counter proposal.
All right, sorry, we got a little technical problem here. For some reason, we can't see the video. It came up late on the other one. And we should say, like, look, this concept of, Brendan's going to rejoin. The concept of having federal land cordoned off from local land is not a new concept. We have federal state parks. We have federal parks. We have federal courthouses. We have federal buildings. And when you're on that federal building, you're on federal land. We have this. We actually do this in like foreign countries even. You have an embassy. Like, this concept is not so mind-blowing, but apparently it is for Ben Shapiro as he discusses the horrors of providing representation to those that we tax in the 700,000 person populated Washington, D.C. Like I say, almost as well, we have multiple states that are that size. Here, Matt, why don't you play it?
So constitutionally speaking, there has to be a federal district. That federal district has historically been Washington, D.C. And there are lots of people who live within Washington, D.C. So what Democrats are trying to do now is they've passed a bill. It passed 216 to 210, with all the Democrats voting in favor and all the Republicans voting against. And that bill basically would take the area that is directly outside of the federal buildings, and then it would carve it off and call it its own state. Now, that's perfectly ridiculous. It's perfectly ridiculous because if you wanted that area to be incorporated into a state, you could totally do that. I have a counter proposal. Why don't we just take those areas and we will then encompass them in either Virginia or Maryland? Simple. Done. Now you have senators. Congratulations.
The people don't want that, I think, would be one good answer to that. Like, nobody wants that.
He wants no one residing in Washington, D.C.?
No, what he wants is to not make D.C. a state. He wants to have it subsumed into other states. You know, while we're at it, do we really need a South and North Dakota, with all due respect, Matt? I mean, come on.
Well, that was purely partisan decision by the Republican Party, to the point where like all the counties in those states are named after just like land commissioners and stuff that were in the party at the time.
What about North and South Carolina. Do we really need 2 Carolinas? Why? I mean, when you talk about the difference between Washington, D.C. and, Virginia and Maryland. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how about we make every state in the country should be the same size as either New York or California or Texas? We just combine them.
Yeah. I mean, he constantly talking about what the founders intended and, what the Constitution says. So no taxation without representation is kind of a fundamental founding principle for America. Would you say, Sam?
Of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, he might want to check if he really loves the Constitution or not.
Do we have more? Yeah, play more.
Congratulations. But no, Democrats want the people of Washington, D.C. to have their own senator. In fact, why don't they do this everywhere? They should probably just say Chicago, it really isn't like the rest of Illinois. So Chicago is going to be its own state with its own senators now. California has so many different areas. Why don't we just make L.A. its
Pause
own?
it for 1 second. I want to remind you that the difference between Chicago and the rest of Illinois is that Chicago has representation right now. They have voting representation in both the House and the Senate. Washington, D.C. has none. That's the difference. They have none.
Yeah, well, besides that,
Besides that, it's almost the same.
Actual state. Okay, that's exactly what they're doing. They're basically saying, okay, we don't have to change the Constitution so long as we leave these federal buildings in their own federal district. But all the people who are living in that surrounding area, who've been living there for, generations, all of those people are now going to have their own state as opposed to being encompassed in Maryland or Virginia. Again, the Washington, D.C. district was designed specifically to be a federal district. If you don't want to live in a place that doesn't have senators, fare thee well, Virginia is just across that river and Maryland is just a little bit the other way. But that's not what Democrats are doing. And they have a rationale for why you must not oppose them. Wait for it. It's because you're a racist. You see that one coming? You didn't see it coming, did you? The whole reason they say that Washington, D.C. exists as a place with no senators is because of racism. Now, that's absurd on its face. It's ridiculous. Washington, D.C. was established when black people weren't even allowed to vote anywhere in the United States, essentially. So racism obviously was not the deciding factor in creating Washington, D.C.
Wait, what?
Yeah, because that terrible rule about black people not voting applied everywhere. So obviously, if you're creating a federal district, it's not about whether black people are going to have senators, because black people at the time couldn't have senators anywhere. So it wasn't about making a racist district where black people couldn't have senators. And now you're trying to retcon the entire story in order to make it an outgrowth of racial animus, but it wasn't.
He kind of disproved his own point there.
Well, I mean, it may be the case that, but I would also suspect that the number of people living in Washington full time was incredibly small. That you didn't have 700,000 people. You didn't have a city that had major issues that the federal government that them having a say in federal policy was relevant, frankly. I mean,
right. It was a town made out of nowhere for the purposes of being a government.
The idea that you wouldn't in any way, like the number of people living there and the nature of the area growing up in such a specific manner would have no bearing on your decision. The question isn't whether they never received voting rights in that district because of racism, is missing the point as to why they're not getting it now.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what the original intent was. Your reason for excluding it now is because you don't want certain people to have representation for basically political reasons.
You know what? There was a bunch of not states when Washington, D.C. was made the capital.
Exactly. And this is kind of the sister argument to when he went viral with that clip about if you live in a coastal zone that could be flooded due to climate change, then what do? You just sell your houses and you move, right? You're going to sell your underwater house to somebody. It's kind of the same argument here. If everyone in DC who wants representation should leave and sell their place. I mean,
he's the type of guy who moved across the country to Nashville. Now he's walking around in cowboy hats, but that's not the existence that most people can live, where you can, I think I want a senator, so I'm going to change where I live for that reason.
Oh, it's just a purely theoretical argument that's not based in reality. And if it ever were based in reality, it would be entirely like a privileged decision made by somebody and made by two people out of the hundreds of thousands who live in DC.
He's not the first person to do that. Why don't we just make it part of Maryland or Virginia, though? And the answer is because nobody's asking for that. That is the only reason you do that is to solve your problem.
Right. Exactly. I mean, somehow after DC was founded, we were able to create, another 40 some odd, 35 some odd states, 37 states.
And those were made just because they deserve to be made, not for purely political purposes in and of themselves, right, Sam? I mean, the founding.
Well, it wasn't because you needed representation for people. It was because God said there should be. We need 37 more states. So get on it.
And on the seventh
guys.
day, he created South Dakota.
That's right. I mean, why not? Why not get rid of South Dakota? Let's just roll it into one Dakota.
I think where we need to get to is the Democrats just need to act like the Republicans that made 2 Dakotas. Just do it, right? We all know the history. Just do it.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that you have members of the Democratic caucus who are just not interested at all and in having that power. And then you have others who, if they were put in the position of having to, for instance, like Chris Coons, I don't think that he would be, if he was the 50th vote for the filibuster, I don't think he would vote against reforming or getting rid of the filibuster. But I think he's happy as the 42nd vote to not have the filibuster removed. Let's put it that way. And the problem is that we have a couple of people who are happy to be the 50th vote. And Joe Biden seems now so timid and incapable of pushing on that end. And it's not going to be, it does not portend well to his future.
Speaking of Biden being timid, can we talk about the vaccine India thing? Because I think.
Yeah. Which one?
Now I'm losing the clip in the email. Hold on.
That he's.
Oh, I guess it's 10, if that's all right by you.
Yeah. Let's do this. Here is Ned Price from the State Department press room. And you can see how intimidated the Biden administration has become by Donald Trump's nativism.
Okay, can I go to vaccine diplomacy?
Sure.
So India is currently facing a horrible surge in coronavirus infections, and we reported that they've asked the United States to lift a ban on the export of vaccine raw materials, which basically threatens to slow the country's vaccination drive. When will the administration decide on that?
So we've addressed this a couple times in the briefing. As I've said, this is a question for USTR when it comes to.
But why is it a question for USTR? Secretary Blinken had a phone call with his counterpart.
That's right, and they did discuss COVID. But when it comes,
and this didn't come up.
We issued a readout of that call, and as the readout of the call notes, they did discuss the COVID-19 response. You asked about intellectual property and certain controls. That is within the purview of USTR. What I will say broadly is that the United States, first and foremost, is engaged in an ambitious and effective and so far successful effort to vaccinate the American people. That campaign is well underway, and we're doing that for a couple of reasons. Number one, we have a special responsibility to the American people. Number two, the American people, this country has been hit harder than any other country around the world. More than 550,000 deaths, tens of millions of infections in this country alone. But there's also a broader point here that I made yesterday that it's, of course, not only in our interest to see Americans vaccinated, it's in the interest of the rest of the world to see Americans vaccinated.
What about
the point
Indians?
The Secretary has made repeatedly is that as long as the virus is spreading anywhere, it is a threat to people everywhere. So as long as the virus is spreading uncontrolled in this country, it can mutate and it can travel beyond our borders. That, in turn, poses a threat beyond the United States. It is true that even as we focus on this, we have also played a leadership role when it comes to seeking to contain the virus beyond our borders. We have re-engaged with the WHO on day one. The $2 billion we've contributed to COVAX with $2 billion more on the way. When it comes to our...
So, I mean, there's just so much BS that was being pushed there. One, he expresses concern about the virus metastasizing or creating variants, and that making it more susceptible to basically the vaccines being ineffective, which is why we need to vaccinate people as soon as possible. But they're not doing anything close to within their power to make that happen. He talks about the United States being hard hit. India just broke a record in terms of documented cases. That is where the virus is raging right now. And if that's what the interest of the administration was, they would do everything they could to stop that. They're not doing that. We have millions of AstraZeneca vaccines that aren't approved in the United States that we've already given to Mexico and Canada that we could send to India right away. And the Biden administration isn't interested in doing that, let alone the temporary suspension. It would just be temporary. Don't worry. You would only harm the profits of these pharmaceutical giants for just a little bit. Suspension of the IP, of the intellectual property. And he's not doing any of that.
Well, they have, as of today, that was a clip from Friday. They have, as of today, supposedly, and we've yet to see the details, but they are supposedly providing raw materials for the vaccines.
Yes.
In addition to, medical supplies.
But it's still not enough is what I mean, there's so many, if they actually were concerned about this, Sam, that's the bare minimum.
Without a doubt. And
they don't want to give away the mRNA details for future vaccine, and that's what they're worried about. It's not about this. It's not about this vaccine at all. It's about the future breakthroughs.
Without a doubt. They want to. They're sitting here trying to figure out what can we give them that will not empower them in the future to reverse engineer any of this stuff, or to learn techniques that are going to be that are going to provide competition to us. I mean, that's really fundamentally it. The BS was not okay, fine, you need to stop the virus in this country. That's all well and good, but these are not mutually exclusive propositions. We do not have a shortage of vaccinations in this country. We have a shortage of demand, if anything. And the idea is that, you give people the ability both to produce their own and release some of our supply. I mean, the fact is that you need to give them the capacity to produce it, because we can ship over 10 million, vaccinations, or 20 million vaccinations. It's nothing to a country like that.
Yeah, but their Covishield vaccine, it's their version of AstraZeneca too. So, I mean, again, we don't even need to, if this is the concern of Biden, give the mRNA information, right? The AstraZeneca shipments, at the very least, could be very similar to the ones that they already have in India. It's no skin off our backs to release that AstraZeneca shipment. I mean, should be considered the bare minimum, not just giving them raw materials and protective equipment. It's absurd.
Yeah.
And the New York Times editorial board is coming out against this, right? So they wrote a big op-ed this morning about how the Biden administration needs to treat this as a more worldwide problem. So maybe now Biden will listen. But like it's that common sense here.
It is a fear of the right's talking points is what it is. I mean, it is.
And every cable outlet, if this was Trump, I'm sorry, they'd be like, oh, this is America first nationalism. And the outrage would be massive given what we're seeing in India right now. But it's not the same for Biden. But it's operating from the same place.
Same implications, certainly.
Same implications, I guess. Yeah.
We played the Bill Gates. I mean, I think the giving of the vaccines is like a fear of nationalist fervor, and then the failure to give sort of the components and the know-how to develop this, I think, is like it's just you have massive lobbying by these pharmaceuticals. Here is Chuck Schumer providing a timeline, and he's on with Mehdi Hassan. And so we're going to know in the next couple of months whether Schumer is going to be able to deliver. Listen to this exchange.
You mentioned a lot of bills are not covered by reconciliation. Some of the biggest issues in America today: immigration reform, police reform, climate change, gun control. None of those can be done by budget reconciliation. It's been widely reported that your plan is to put multiple bills for a vote on the Senate floor, have the GOP vote them down, filibuster them, and then reform the filibuster. But I wonder, how long can you wait to do that, Senator? What's your deadline? Because time isn't on your side. The For the People Act needs to be passed right now. And if even one elderly member of your caucus, God forbid, were to pass away or be incapacitated, you're no longer majority leader anymore. The Democratic majority could go tomorrow. So time isn't on your side.
I agree we have to move quickly. I would say that the deadline for S1 is a little longer than you say, but it's probably by August or so. We're consulting the experts. When is the latest that S1 can undo some of the despicable and frankly racist changes that these Republican legislatures have made or are trying to make in the way people vote? And so the bottom line here, Mehdi, is simple. We need unity. By definition, we need all 50. We're working hard to attain that unity. We've attained it on everything so far. On the major issues, when we had the minority, the three biggest issues were ACA, the horrible tax cuts of Trump, and the impeachment. We were 100% united. On the three biggest issues so far here, the president's cabinet, with one exception, which I regret, but everything else with the impeachment trial, and with ARP, we were united. I work hard to bring about that unity. And I have a leadership team. I think I've mentioned this to you. We meet every Monday night at about 4:45, and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are on the team, and Joe Manchin and Mark Warner are on the team, and we discuss it, and we try to respect each other's positions. But so far, it has produced the kind of change that I think America needs.
There you have it. Self-imposed deadline by August for S1, which is the HR1. And we will know by the fall as to whether they're going to, if the filibuster is going to fall or not. And I don't know. He just seems to be treading water there. He doesn't seem terribly confident. And you know, we're looking at things like the PRO Act. We're looking at, you know, these are just bills that are already out there. It's going to be interesting to find out. And one wonders what kind of horse trading is happening there, right? Like, we know Joe Biden is not going to expand Medicare at this point, even though and maybe drop the age to 60. I don't think so. I mean, he claimed he would in his you know, on the campaign trail. But you wonder, what kind of horse trading is going on between those two factions. Whether we saw Warren and Sanders and 14 other senators call for Biden to expand to Medicare. The bill, as it's written, supposedly just funds the ACA. You wonder if they're horse trading certain provisions for getting rid of the filibuster, and this for the PRO Act, that for HR S1. I don't know, but but one has to wonder.
I of course I wonder, and I hope that that's the case. Whatever gets Cinema and Manchin comfortable in this situation, but especially with HR/S1, time is of the essence given what's necessary going into 2022. So there's a self-imposed deadline, but it should be moved up because of what needs to be put in place in order for Democrats to, I guess, not lose ground going into the midterms. And that's not just important from a perspective of, Democrats maintaining power. In my view, that's important in terms of saving the country from extreme gerrymandering and adjustments by the Republicans that could, further hamper Democrats' ability to win, especially with the Trump out of office, that they can't, run against this crazy person.
Emma, I think Biden was listening to you. I'm starting to see reports that the U.S. is sharing 60 million doses of AstraZeneca with other countries. Don't know if they're all going to India or what.
See, this is what happened, Sam. I laid the trap for student debt canceller says what, right?
AstraZeneca giveaway says what?
What? Oh, damn it. Yeah. So I should have gone. I think he heard my threat and then understood that he had to appease me. Give me one of the two things I'm asking for.
This is let's play this Rick Scott thing. This is awesome. Rick Scott, who won the award that I made up of the guy who had to plead the fifth more times than anyone who ever became senator, pleading the fifth for defrauding the U.S. government in a Medicaid case, I believe it was on George Stephanopoulos' show. And he was asked, why did you make up an award and give it to Donald Trump?
And fix TPS, it doesn't make sense to me, but they won't.
Finally, a couple weeks back, you gave former President Trump something you called the Champion of Freedom Award. That was on April 10th. And you did that despite the fact that the former president continues to spread lies about the election, about Mike Pence, and the Capitol siege on January 6th. He said there was no threat there. Doesn't giving the president an award like that endorse that kind of behavior?
I gave him the award for the right reasons. He worked on border security. He worked on creating the best economy we've had probably in my lifetime. He worked on holding Xi and China accountable, the Castro regime accountable, Maduro accountable, helping Israel, got the Abraham Accords done. So, he worked hard. Every president I know would like to get more things accomplished. But he did some things that prior presidents had not gotten done.
Well, except you gave that award after he spread the lies about the election. And also, you're in charge of getting Republican senators elected in 2022. You've asked the former president to endorse all GOP incumbents, but he refused to do that. And he's going to actively campaign, he says, against Senator Lisa Murkowski.
Well, Lisa Murkowski will have a great win. Republicans are united. We don't like the Biden agenda. Republicans like a secure border, open schools. They don't want to be.
All right. My favorite part is that he gets away with just making up an award. The question shouldn't be like, why did you give this made up award to Donald Trump? He didn't deserve it. The question should have been, why did you make up an award?
Right. It's the long and the short of it is that Rick Scott wanted to permanently affix his lips to Donald Trump's behind.
There you go.
That's That was a very wordy way of him trying to get around. I want him to like me.
That
And,
award is the shape of lips. I think it is.
well, I mean, look, that's fitting. He wasn't able to say such a dumb person that I have not quite figured out yet that me signaling loyalty to Donald Trump via flattery is not going to get that loyalty in return, because I haven't learned the lessons of everybody Trump's ever worked with before.
I don't think he's looking for loyalty as much as he wants to basically just position himself. I mean, everybody in the Republican Party knows that if you want to have success in the Republican Party, you need to be a Trumpista. That's the bottom line. Those are the people who win in that party.
Okay, not loyalty, but win Trump's affections. You can win Trump's affections momentarily. Doesn't mean when it immediately doesn't suit him, Trump won't turn around and revoke that affection.
That's true.
There's literally nothing on the Champion of Freedom award besides Rick Scott awarding it to Donald Trump.
There is, yeah. It's just a completely. It is.
Will they ever even use that award again? Or will he be the sole recipient? Why didn't they just make it the Donald J. Trump Award and give it to Donald J. Trump?
What is? I want to do this clip of Snowden.
I need to take a quick break. I just mentioned that in the chat.
What is this? Can you guys explain this to me, Brendan?
This is a Matt.
What
Matt
is
clip.
this?
The Snowden thing?
Yeah.
So yeah, this guy who we have a Vice article that we can show up to, but basically this guy Snowden got invited to this scammers like sort of investor party where he was asking people like, to give me $47 to get a ticket to the special ultra advice, get the real stock tips sort of deal. And I guess it was kind of weird because there was some talk on social media, like, why is Snowden doing this? And I guess that got to Snowden. And so, or maybe Snowden just did his due diligence and dropped something right in this guy's lap.
Yeah, this is pretty good. I like this.
And Brendan, do you have the full clip here or?
I can pull the full clip, but I don't know where to start it. It's not.
I'll play it. Okay, yeah, I'll put it here. Yeah, give me 1 second here. Full screen.
I certainly appreciate the scamming the scammers.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. So, all right.
That people are struggling, and there are things that we can't ask them to do. And to say that that's okay, to turn a blind eye, to go on with that, I think is wrong. And so I have to ask, it's very unusual that you booked me for this conference because, as a whistleblower, it's my obligation, I think personally and professionally, to ask, is this you?
Yes.
Because I think that it is.
Yes.
And I think that the things that I've heard tonight make me very uncomfortable with this event. I think it makes me very uncomfortable, and everyone involved with this should really question, is this the kind of association that they want to have? Are you going to be able to deliver on the promises that you're making them? I sure hope to God that you will. But my advice to everyone on this call tonight, everyone looking at this, is look up what you're getting involved in. If you spent money, are you sure that you want to spend it, or do you want to charge it back? And by God, think hard about if you want to continue this. Because for me, ladies and gentlemen, for tonight, I don't. Thank you so much, and good night.
Wow. Let's take like a few minutes break, and I'll be right back, and we'll go over this. I'll go over the whole thing with you guys. This is totally unexpected, and I'm so sorry that this has happened. A lot of times, same things like where somebody writes something, and these are the same stuff that a lot of people do, where there's a headline where people look at
comments,
and I'm so sorry to see that he has chosen to do that. So I just need 5 minutes, and I'll be right back. Thank you.
I'm probably going to need closer to 10 or 15. Does he come back? Come on, let's see when he comes back.
That's the end of that stream there. I don't know. I don't know if we have it coming back.
That's so awesome. Good for him. Good for Snowden. That guy does deserve a pardon, not just because of that, but in fact, having nothing to do with that. But Snowden should have been pardoned 6 years ago, whenever it was, at the end of the Obama era. You know, at one point he's going to be, right? I mean, it's just going to end up being like 10, 15 years from now or something. But I think Snowden deserves a pardon. And so good for him. That's pretty awesome. All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from an 865 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh, is this me?
It is you.
Hello?
Hello.
Hey, hey Sam. My name is Bryce. I'm calling from Tucson, Arizona.
Bryce from Tucson. What's on your mind?
Well, first I wanted to give you guys an update on the case from Knoxville. Anthony Johnson, I think was his name. Anyway, sounds like his there's not any charges pressed, but his girlfriend's mom actually called to call the police, and so that's why they ended up finding him.
My understanding was she called the police, and is this wrong that my understanding is that she called the police because she wasn't happy that she was dating a black kid. Is that what your understanding is too, or is that social media?
Well, it seems to be because she she's worried about their relationship or anything, but it seemed to be good intention. Like she was calling out of, because she wanted to have him checked up on or something like that. So it seems to be like another one of these cases of like people calling the police instead of calling someone like,
Right.
healthcare, mental health provider or something like that.
And did they release the video?
Yeah, the video is released. And I guess I should say I'm actually from Knoxville, so that's why it was first on my mind. But the video is released, and it's definitely kind of, shocking to watch because it just kind of happens out of nowhere. But there's this moment right after you see the gun in one of the officers' body cams that it's really, it seems like there's a shot fired, but apparently it wasn't fired by Anthony. And so it seems like he sort of panics and he starts, screaming, wait, hold on, that sort of thing. And then, after that, they shoot him because I guess they weren't able to identify where the gunshot came from or whatever. But it seems like, unfortunately, it'll be one of these things that, the DA is not pressing charges, like I said, and it's going to be one of these things where it's, the officers will just say, well, there was a gunshot, I was afraid for my life, that sort of thing.
Right. All right. Well, appreciate the call.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Thank you for the update on that. We've got another situation too, apparently, that let's see. DOJ is investigating Louisville, Kentucky Police Department with use of force. This is including with respect to people involved in peaceful, expressive activities. This is at the DOJ. And then in North Carolina, Elizabeth City has declared a state of emergency ahead of the release of the body camera footage of the law enforcement killing of Andrew Brown Jr. The family is expected to view the footage today. My guess is that footage is not very good.
How is that legal to just call a state of emergency before releasing this stuff and putting your residents in lockdown basically in perpetuity?
I don't, if the city has a compelling reason, I guess, and, maybe it's not inconceivable that somebody's not bringing a court case. It's just, I don't know how effective it's going to be.
Right.
Calling from a 519 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Sandy from Ontario.
Sandy from Ontario. What's on your mind, Sandy?
I'm also known as left of the box. I've been creeping around a bit.
All right. Well, left of the box.
So,
Creeper.
yeah.
What's on your mind?
Yeah. I was wanting to talk about maple washing. Are you guys familiar with that term?
Maple washing. Is this some type of like excuses for Canada or what?
Yep, pretty much. It's the same thing as whitewashing, only it makes Canada seem like we're more polite, we're not as bad as we are, that sort of thing. And it's a constant thing Americans do that I'm trying to correct the record when I see it. Because
you
it just
put that in a very
adds to the
polite
problem.
way.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm sorry. I was trying to make a joke that you put that in a very polite manner.
Yes, I am very polite myself when I want to be.
Well, yeah, get to the. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I couldn't help myself.
Yeah,
that was
that's okay.
low hanging fruit there, as it were. But what is it that I mean? What is it that is maple wash the most in your mind?
Oh, wow. Pretty much everything. Like when it comes to something like slavery, quite often Canadians will say, well, there was no slavery in Canada, which is not true at all. Because the British Empire abolished slavery in its colonies in about 1833. And by that time, case law had already gotten rid of a lot of slavery in Canada. But before that, there absolutely was. But since the British North American Act was signed in 1867, and that's what made Canada Canada, we often get away with saying it wasn't in Canada that it happened.
Yeah, none of the New World would have been colonized without slaves.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Matt was saying none of the New World would have been colonized without slaves. But fair enough. Yeah, so it's a technicality in that way.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to racism and the indigenous population, it is absolutely horrendous up here. Like beyond belief horrendous. In the States, I know the percentage of the incarceration population is 30% Black, but it's 15% of your overall population.
Yeah.
But in Canada, 30% of the men and over 40% of the women incarcerated are Indigenous peoples. They make up 5% of our population.
Wow.
And with kids, about 8% of children are Indigenous, and yet they're more than half of all the children in the foster care system.
What is your sense that the United States, why we have I certainly had a somewhat distorted view of Canada. I think part of it is just like it's fun to say that Canadians are nice. But why do you think the United States has such a distorted view, or is there also sort of like a certain distortion within the context of Canadian culture as well?
Well, that is part of the problem, that in Canada too, a lot of people don't know how bad it is, because if you make a decent income, you live in a decent neighborhood, and you're white, you don't really know how bad it actually is getting for a lot of people in this country. And that's the image that Justin Trudeau likes to kind of impress upon other people. But when you actually look behind the scenes and lift the rug up, there is so much going on that people just don't know. They just don't know about. Like when the United States went to Iraq, we were told that Canada said no, and a lot of people kind of went to sleep. But we ended up absolutely participating in that, spending over $300 million, sending people in. And we've participated in over 30,000 airstrikes since then. And right now, Justin Trudeau is trying to procure his own armed drone fleet. So then that way we don't really have to rely on you anymore.
Oh, well, that's nice. Yeah. My perception of Canadians being more attuned to what their country is doing is I don't know. Maybe I'm just also comparing it to the United States, but fair enough.
Well, yeah, like also the healthcare system, it's going downhill because no politician is going to stand up on the podium and say, okay, we're going to try to privatize healthcare, but it's constantly being chipped away at, and bits and pieces are being privatized all the time. And that led to, our current situation with the vaccines or lack of them, and the long-term care home situation that at the beginning of this pandemic was so bad, they had to call the military in to get it under control.
Yeesh.
And the thing is like when it comes to other countries with healthcare, ours is the only one that doesn't cover prescription drugs. And recently, Bill C-213 was voted on, and the Conservatives and the Liberals teamed up to vote against it so that we wouldn't get pharmacare, which was almost not covered in the news at all. And yet the Liberals also recently voted with the Bloc Québécois for an amendment to Bill C-7, and that's to allow people who are disabled or have mental health issues to apply for MAID. That's medical assistance in dying. So they won't help us with our medications. They won't help us with the cost of living because what you get on disability is 40% below the poverty rate. But they're more than happy to let us sign up for suicide.
Yeah, and that gets sold as sort of a progressive measure. And I guess if it was part of a, a broader, set of comprehensive care, that's really, sequencing it, that should be the last thing that is passed, right? The first thing that should be passed is how to keep you alive, and do so in a way that is not, debilitating in and of itself. But
because like personally, I'm not opposed to it myself. If there's people who that is absolutely what they want, but everything else has to be done ahead of time. Like there has to be proper housing, there has to be proper supports, proper medication to make this the absolute last option, which our government is not doing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree on that. Well, thank you for setting me straight about Canada. I will build upon my resent for all the comedians coming down and taking our jobs. And we'll be a little more jaundiced towards what's going on up there.
Well, I'm trying my best with my channel to kind of bring awareness to this because, again, a lot of people in Canada don't even know how bad it is.
What's your channel?
Left of the Box.
Left of the Box. Okay.
On YouTube.
On YouTube. All right. I didn't realize that was a YouTube thing. Okay. So Left of the Box on YouTube. All right. Well, good luck with it. Hopefully folks will tune in. Appreciate the call.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. All right. We got time for one more call. You are the final caller of the day. We've had a lot of people have been hanging on the phone for, gosh, over an hour. Calling from a 647 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, I'm Hussein, also from Ontario.
Hussein from Ontario. Well, what is your, do you feel that there's baby washing in Canada as well?
Oh, absolutely. We had residential schools till the early 90s.
I don't even know what that is.
Away Indigenous children.
Oh, really?
They
Oh,
would take
jeez.
Indigenous children away, and essentially it was cultural genocide.
Oy. Horrible.
Yeah. It was just barbaric treatment. I did have another question, though, about a different topic I was thinking about.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. On the concept of police reform, what's your view on implementing, and this is like a program a number of different countries could adopt, national law enforcement blacklist? It would be like sort of out of the judicial system, regardless of a conviction, sort of federally appointed investigators would investigate the conduct and dole out punishment in the sort of disciplinary hearing more than a trial, but independent of any sort of department's internal affairs.
So, you're saying for the police departments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
And this would like regardless of a judicial conviction, I'm saying this.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, well, we have a mechanism that is not formalized in that way, but we have like police departments that are under consent decrees. In fact, the DOJ just announced that they're going to do this in Louisville.
Also have their own blacklists for calling up testimony, right? Some DAs take it upon themselves to have blacklists of officers who they don't trust to give testimony in cases.
I see what you're saying. Like I'm not familiar with that, with how that term blacklisting is used in this instance, but I think there should be
sort of.
I would be in favor of a Department of Justice, of an agency within the Department of Justice, that is not just the Civil Rights Division, but that is explicitly looking over the shoulder constantly of police departments around the country. I don't know if you could do every police department in the country, but I think you could do like the top 50 police departments, and you have.
I mean, yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking. A sort of agency that would work under the umbrella of the DOJ, a sort of civil rights agency that was also dealing an extrajudicial mean of getting officers who've shown a propensity for acts of brutality off the streets.
I mean, I don't think that is, sufficient. I think you need to, diminish the role of police in society.
Absolutely, this would be implemented alongside other measures.
But I do think also an effective agency like that would help the political case for stripping the police departments of the scope of their authority.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no,
especially the militarized aspect of their authority.
Well, yes, and I think there are other ways you can also.
They've been accruing like armored personnel carriers, and yep. Would you go as far as to say officers who've shown propensity for acts like that and who have records with acts like that? Would you go as far as to restrict their access to firearms as private citizens?
As private citizens, well, I would restrict everybody's access to firearms.
Absolutely, but I'm saying apart from like an assault weapons ban or a high capacity magazine ban, I don't think we're ever going to be able to get rid of handguns in the States.
Oh, I think it's about to get a lot worse, actually, to be honest with you. So, I mean, but yeah,
well,
I mean, as a matter of
Republicans are shifting right and right.
Yeah,
I can only assume.
As a matter of course, I think if you've been implicated, I mean, I don't know if I would want the DOJ. I think you need legal proceedings to do that, absent the ability to do that for everybody. But that's getting a little bit more specific. But appreciate the call. I know things are pretty tough right there with COVID, so hang in there.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the call.
All right, folks, that's it for our caller portion of the program today. Obviously, as usual, we've run out of time. Apologies to everybody who's holding on. Let's do some IMs and we got to get going. Henry, best way to grill Brussels sprouts with a little garlic and olive oil and a veggie tray. You can grill most veggies, salt, pepper, garlic, and olive oil. Henry is has grilled for me in the past, and he is quite good at that. Uchiwali, Guinness Beer used to use fish bladders in its production. If you weren't such a Trump-hating cuck, you'd know this. Nice guy. Mongolians drink kumis, a beer made of fermented donkey milk.
This is what Kudlow's talking about.
That's exactly right.
That's what Republicans should be sort of like herded toward.
Right. You're no more kumis under Joe Biden's plan. That's one of the big outcries from the Midwest. No more kumis. No more kumis. Lefty from the 814, Sam, we need to have a conversation about your coworkers. That joke about the rabbit-based beer with the hops deserves more of a response than it got.
This is the second time you read this one.
Well, I didn't read the first time. I just did it from memory. All right. 4 more of these. Jay Tingle. Majority Report also had an unofficial regular correspondent on the ground in Bangkok during the coup of 2014. That's correct. We did. Tim, I think it was. Shelby from Phoenix. I learned about the Lochner era last year in constitutional powers. It's nice to know I'm learning useful stuff in law school. Indeed. D.C. was one of the first free cities, so slaves flocked to D.C. and black people began winning elections, so they took the city government away. It wasn't until the 60s that D.C. got a mayor. There's plenty of racist quotes about why D.C. can't have representation. It was entirely about racism. Thank you for that. Teacher in Czech Republic. I'm getting my second Pfizer shot on Thursday. Only 7% of the Czech people have gotten it. At least one shot. And latest poll says only 20% are willing to get it. The numbers here are still surging. They announced one young woman with the Indian variant in Prague today. Vaccine hesitancy is everywhere. Damn.
Oh, boy.
All right, two more. Aaron is not cool. I think up for next for Emma's trickery is a whoopee cushion that leads to the passing of the Green New Deal. And the final IM of the day. Joe's Kansas City called in a few weeks ago to share news about the Kansas City tenants. Fast forward to today, and now my landlord is trying to evict me without reason. Wish me luck. Tenants' rights are here are slim to none. Good luck, Joe. Maybe get on the Discord. Tell people how they can help. That's at majoritydiscord.com. All right, Emma, Matt, Brendan, great job today. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
To get to where it might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.